Dr. Matthew Green hadn't truly lived since the autumn of 2018. A renowned cardiologist in Manhattan, he saved lives daily, but hadn't felt his own heartbeat in years, not in any meaningful way. His wife, Eliza, had died beside him in a car crash on their way to a concert she'd been excited about for weeks. Since then, Matthew filled his days with hospital shifts and spent his nights walking alone through Central Park. His Upper West Side apartment remained untouched, a museum of a life that no longer existed. Love, to him, was a ghost, a beautiful, cruel echo from a time when he still believed in forever. It was late April, and Central Park wore the first signs of spring like a quiet promise. Matthew's footsteps echoed near Bow Bridge when a sharp crash broke the calm. A woman had fallen from a bicycle, her frame tangled in the spokes, one knee scraped raw. Without hesitation, Matthew rushed to her side. "Are you okay?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "I think so," she winced, brushing auburn curls from her face. "Well, except for my dignity. That's definitely bruised." Her name was Harper Lane, a 32-year-old artist from Manchester. She had arrived in New York 2 months earlier to escape a failed engagement and creative stagnation. That night, fate, or perhaps something gentler, had caused her to crash right into the quiet orbit of Dr. Matthew Green. At the hospital, Harper sat on the edge of an exam table, legs swinging slightly, while Matthew cleaned her knee with practiced care. She watched him work, her eyes curious, scanning his face for hints of softness beneath the clinical calm. "You don't smile much," she said. "I smile when it's warranted. And tonight doesn't count. You fell off a bicycle. I fell into a meet cute," she corrected. "I think that warrants at least a smirk." He didn't smirk, but his eyes warmed. It was enough for Harper to lean into the silence that followed, not as a void, but as a space where something unfamiliar, yet comforting, lived. Over the next few weeks, they kept bumping into each other. First at a coffee shop near the hospital, then again at an art exhibit she'd mentioned offhandedly. Whether coincidence or intention, neither of them questioned it. She would smile. He would offer a dry comment. She would laugh. And something, unspoken, would settle between them. Harper was light where Matthew was shadow. She spoke with her hands, painted emotions onto canvas that spilled from her like second skin. Matthew, on the other hand, had locked his emotions so tightly behind years of grief that even he had forgotten the combination. But around her, he didn't feel the need to talk. Her presence filled the air in a way that asked for nothing but allowed everything. One Sunday, she invited him to her studio in Williamsburg. It was a chaotic, sunlit space filled with half-finished canvases and the smell of turpentine. She handed him a brush and pointed to a blank canvas. "Paint," she said. "I don't paint." "Exactly." He hesitated, then dipped the brush into blue. The stroke he made was awkward, crooked. Harper laughed, not unkindly, and added a burst of yellow beside it. They spent hours like that, creating a mess that meant nothing and everything. When the sun dipped below the windows, Matthew realized he hadn't thought of Eliza all afternoon. It didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like breath. They didn't speak of love. Not yet. But when he offered to walk her home that evening, and she simply nodded without a smile or a joke, it was the first quiet acknowledgement that what was growing between them had roots deepening quietly, tenderly, and irreversibly. Harper's world thrived on spontaneity, on colors that bled past the lines and mornings that began at noon. Matthew's was a regimented cadence of beeping monitors and clinical precision. As the bond between them deepened, so did the quiet clash of their realities. He would leave work late, exhausted, only to find a voicemail from her inviting him to a midnight rooftop jazz session in Harlem. Sometimes he made it. Sometimes he didn't. When he did, he'd stand at the edge of the crowd, watching Harper sway to the music, free in a way he couldn't remember ever being. When he didn't, guilt clawed at him. She noticed. She always noticed. "You're not a maybe kind of man, are you?" she asked one evening after he canceled dinner for the third time in 2 weeks. "I'm trying," he said. "I don't need you to try. I just need you to want to." The next day, he showed up at her studio with pastries and a tired smile. They ate in silence, but it was a silence warmed by effort, not absence. Then came the painting. It was Harper's first New York exhibit, and her centerpiece was titled Stillness. It was an abstract swirl of blue and gray, dark and quiet. She said it was inspired by a man who didn't know he was worth the noise of life until someone painted it around him. Everyone loved it. "Everyone except Matthew. I don't want to be still," he said afterward, the words clipped. "I want to move again. But I don't want to be someone's project." "You're not," Harper whispered. "You're someone I care about. Someone who made me believe again." He left that night without saying more. She didn't call. Not because she didn't want to, but because she understood the language of grief, of needing space to scream in silence. Days passed. Matthew buried himself in work. He performed emergency surgery on a child whose heart had stopped twice. He stared at x-rays like they held answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. And then, Eliza's birthday arrived. Every year he brought flowers to the bench in Central Park where they had first kissed. But this time, he sat longer, and he cried, not out of loss, but from the realization that for the first time he wasn't crying only for her. He missed Harper, fiercely. The next morning, he walked into her studio unannounced. She was painting a field of wildflowers, chaotic, bright, unapologetically alive. "I've been still long enough," he said. "But I'm scared. I don't know how to live in color again." She set down her brush. "Then let's start with a single stroke." But even as they began again, life had another test in store. Matthew received a job offer in Boston, a prestigious fellowship, one he had dreamed of years ago. He hadn't applied. It had come through a colleague's recommendation. A door opened, wide, but to walk through it meant walking away, and Harper, for all her warmth, had just signed a lease for her first solo gallery in Brooklyn. They sat together on her fire escape that night, the skyline burning orange. "What if this is it?" he asked. "What if it's not?" she replied. Neither had answers, only aching questions. The days after the fire escape conversation drifted by like leaves in cold water. They didn't fight. There were no accusations, no dramatic scenes, just the gentle, brutal erosion of shared space. Matthew didn't accept the Boston offer immediately, but he also didn't decline it. Harper, for her part, poured herself into preparing her gallery, layering each canvas with colors she wished she could say aloud. When they spoke, their words were polite, careful, as though they were afraid the truth would shatter whatever remained unbroken. Then, one morning, she wasn't at the studio. A note sat on the easel where Stillness once stood. "Gone to breathe. Don't follow. Not yet. H." She had flown to Iceland on a last-minute retreat with fellow artists. No Wi-Fi, no updates, just distance. Matthew didn't know how to feel. He told himself it was fine. That space was healthy. But the apartment was emptier than usual, and Central Park no longer brought peace. He went through the motions, patience, rounds, morning coffee, but the silence Harper had once filled now screamed at him. Weeks passed. Then one night, he opened his closet and pulled out the sketch Harper had made of him on a napkin months before. He had laughed when she gave it to him. "I drew you thinking," she'd said. "You're beautiful when you forget to hide." He stared at it for a long time, then packed a small bag. He booked a flight to Reykjavik, not knowing if he'd find her, not knowing if she'd want to be found. He just knew silence wasn't enough anymore. Reykjavik was colder than Matthew expected. Snow dusted the cobblestone streets, and daylight lingered like a secret. He didn't have an address, just a gallery name Harper had once mentioned in passing, and the hope that love, if it was real, could still be traced. After 2 days of searching and 1 missed return flight, he found it. A converted greenhouse on the edge of town, glass walls fogged by warmth and color. Inside, an exhibit titled Motion had just opened. Her name was on the poster. He entered slowly, heart pounding. The space pulsed with life. Canvases swirled with energy, reds and golds and streaks of storm blue. And in the center stood a single piece, a silhouette facing away, staring into a painted sky. It was him. He turned, and there she was, standing in the corner, palette in hand, as if she'd been expecting him. "I thought you might come," Harper said, voice calm but unsure. "I didn't know where else to be." She walked over slowly, her eyes searching his like a puzzle she'd stopped trying to solve. "I needed to find out if I could breathe without you," she said. "And?" "I could, but I didn't want to." He stepped closer, his voice quieter. "Now, I was going to say yes to Boston. I thought it would make sense, but it didn't feel right. None of it did without you." She blinked, and tears didn't fall. They simply shimmered, held bravely in place. "Why didn't you call?" he asked. "Because I was terrified you'd say goodbye." "I came to say the opposite." She exhaled sharply, as if releasing something she hadn't realized she'd held. They stood there, not touching, not rushing, until he finally said, "You painted me moving. I painted what I hoped was possible, and just like that, possibility became real." They stayed in Reykjavik for 3 more days. They didn't talk about the future, not right away. Instead, they wandered the black sand beaches, shared quiet meals in candlelit cafes, and watched the northern lights in silence. Matthew found peace not in knowing what came next, but in the rare gift of presence, of being seen. On the last night, Harper led him to a small wooden chapel tucked behind a windswept hill. Inside, it was empty except for a bench and an old piano. "I come here when I'm scared," she whispered. "What are you afraid of now?" he asked. "That this is too good, that I'll lose it." He sat at the piano and played a simple, broken melody. Nothing rehearsed, nothing polished. She sat beside him, her hand finding his. "I'm afraid too," he admitted. "But I think fear just means something matters." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Then this matters more than anything I've ever known." That night they made love for the first time, not as an escape, but as a coming home. There was nothing rushed, nothing uncertain. Every movement was a choice. Every breath, a promise. Back in New York, life slowly shifted. Matthew turned down the Boston offer. He didn't make a dramatic speech or announce a grand sacrifice. He simply stayed. With her. Harper's Gallery in Brooklyn opened to glowing reviews. Matthew stood by her side, silent but proud, his hand warm in hers. In turn, Harper began volunteering at an art therapy program at the hospital, guiding young patients through color and creation. Their lives didn't merge perfectly. There were missed calls, tired nights, deadlines, doubt. But the love between them was no longer fragile. It had been tested. It had chosen to stay. One evening, while reorganizing his apartment, Harper found a photo of Eliza. She held it in her hands gently, then looked up at Matthew. "She was beautiful," she said softly. "She was," he nodded. "And so are you. You don't have to forget her. I'm not trying to, but I'm not hiding behind her anymore either." Harper kissed him then, not to steal something away, but to give something back. Love, for Matthew, was no longer a ghost. It was Harper, in living color. The transformation wasn't instant, but it was undeniable. Matthew's apartment, once a shrine to stillness and memory, began to change. A splash of orange appeared in the kitchen, a ceramic bowl Harper had picked up from a street vendor. Then came the worn armchair she loved from her studio. Canvases lined the hallway, and the scent of oil paint blended with fresh coffee in the mornings. But it wasn't just the space that changed. Matthew did too. He laughed more at work. Nurses noticed the difference. Patients felt it. He took more time explaining diagnoses, asked more about people's lives, not just their symptoms. One resident said, "You seem lighter," and he didn't deny it. Harper, meanwhile, launched weekend art sessions for patients and their families. The hospital board was skeptical, until they saw children who hadn't smiled in weeks painting hope in shades of blue and gold. Matthew watched one afternoon from the back of the room, unnoticed. She stood at the center, laughing, guiding, healing. He realized something then. Harper hadn't just brought life back to him. She was breathing it into the entire hospital, into the city. Their story, once one of grief and distance, had become something others quietly admired. A reminder that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing the future, together. One quiet morning, Harper left an envelope on Matthew's pillow. Inside was a note, handwritten in paint-stained ink. "You once told me you didn't know how to live in color again. But Matthew, you are color. The kind that doesn't shout, but stays. The kind that lingers in a room long after the lights go out. Thank you for letting me love you. Thank you for choosing to stay." At the bottom, she'd drawn a small heart, half blue, half gold. He pressed the letter to his chest and closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt entirely, irreversibly alive. Matthew once believed that love, once lost, was something final. Like a page turned, never to be read again. But Harper had taught him that some stories didn't end. They changed form. They paused, took detours, returned stronger. He still visited the bench in Central Park, but now he wasn't alone. Harper sat beside him, sometimes sketching, sometimes simply holding his hand. And when spring returned, he no longer counted the years since Eliza's passing. He counted the moments he'd dared to love again. He had faced stillness and chosen motion, not the hurried, breathless kind, but the slow, deliberate rhythm of a heart, healing by choice, not by chance. And that, he knew, was the real miracle.